Hello and welcome to the Footballco Business Podcast, the show where I get to dig into the most interesting stories from the world of football. I'm your host, Alex Manby, and today my primary guest is James Ruth, Chief Marketing Officer at MLS club Austin FC. I'll be talking to James about creating the Austin FC identity and brand, what it's like having Matthew McConaughey as co-owner, and to give him his official title, Minister of Culture, and how all this translates into the stands to create the Austin FC matchday atmosphere. That atmosphere is, of course, driven by Austin FC's supporter culture. So to get a balanced perspective, we're also joined by Rico Hernandez, VP of Los Verdes, and Christine Hanley, VP of Austin Anthem. James, Rico, and Christine, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great pronunciation on Verdes as well. It's decent.
Yes,
really good. Better than mine.
I've been practicing. So I would like to start hearing from each of you about what it is that makes Austin FC a unique sporting organization.
Yeah, I'll jump in and then kick it to y'all. But I think the biggest thing is from day one, there's been a huge focus from the club and in conjunction with the supporters to try and make Austin FC the best possible representation of the city of Austin, right? We're so lucky to be in this place. For anybody that's been here or hasn't been here, but maybe has heard about it because of South by or ACL, this is a special place. It's a really, really cool city. It's a city with people that are unique, special, and unlike people you're going to meet anywhere else. And, you know, when we started the club and started to look at what is our opportunity, it really became this idea of, man, we can be a representation of Austin, right, through the sport of football. From day one, we were hell-bent on that. And I think, you know, I came in here in March of 2020. Rico and Christine have been in Austin much longer than I have. But it's funny because from day one, I remember the initial conversations between supporter groups and the club. That representation of Austin was the key goal. Mm-hmm. And I think that's been a point of focus. And every decision we make on the club side, but also I think on the supporter side, is run through that lens of how do we best represent Austin as a city, right? A city that's got all this sort of cultural texture and vibe and just this unique identity, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, just to kind of piggyback what James was saying, I think like from like the Los Verdes side, it's just like the inclusivity aspect of it. It's just like bringing people together from so many different parts of the country. You know, Austin now is like a melting pot of people from all over the U.S. and it's just like you felt it from the beginning, from just like even building the stadium and where they're going there and just like seeing every single cement being laid down to every seat being put down. It's like that excitement to like get people together in that stadium, and just like we were already getting together before then. So I think it was just continuing to see that momentum build. So it was like magical moments happening each day. I'll pass.
I agree with Rico. Since day one, we've had this great atmosphere, and I love that it brings people together no matter what. Win or lose, we celebrate after the game, and we're ready for the next one.
I think it's worth stressing, in case any listeners aren't aware, just how young Austin FC is. James, is it worth giving a very brief history of how Austin FC came to be?
Yeah, I mean, there's the brief version and then the extended deep cuts version, but we'll go as brief as possible because there's a lot of history there. But ultimately, Anthony Precourt, the majority owner, had an opportunity to create a team in Austin and ultimately started that process, got sign off from the city to ultimately move forward, which is now commemorated in a song by our supporters, 7-4, which was the city council vote to make Austin FC an actual thing, which I think is always one of the coolest things, like an encapsulation and such a good illustration of the fact that what's unique about Austin FC is that the want and the culture for the club actually in a lot of ways preceded what happened on the pitch. Like, I always talk about how Austin Anthem, you guys celebrated your 7th anniversary recently? What was it, 10?
It's 10.
10, okay.
Yeah.
So, you know, a supporters group existing 10 years before the club actually got on the pitch, highlighting that the community of Austin was a proper football community, you know, global football community ready for the club. But ultimately, the team the opportunity for it was voted on by City Hall, won the vote and pushed forward, and ultimately got the charter from MLS to be a club in 2019. I was lucky enough to come here in March of 2020, and then we were playing our first game in April of 21. So, in the global football context, we're a really young club, but I think the thing that we're all most proud of is that we have a really substantial culture. Nothing about the stadium experience, nothing about our supporters culture, nothing about the club, at least from our perspective. And obviously we're biased, but nothing feels new, but it doesn't feel unfamiliar. And I think that all goes back to the fact that we've been hell-bent on representing Austin in everything we do. So everybody that's an Austinite that walks into that stadium, there is a sense of comfort that they get there because they've seen this place before. And, I hear examples of it all the time of people. I even remember our first home match of June of 21. And, I was like taking things in, walking around the stadium, just kind of seeing people's reactions. And this woman in front of me just said, "Oh my God, this like place feels like Austin so much." Just the stadium, right? Which is a good encapsulation of, or a good sort of result of all of the effort to be Austin centric in everything we do, right? And that comes down to the creative, the content, what food we serve in the stadium, the chants that supporters sing, all of that sort of stuff is oriented around Austin. So it's put us in a position that even though we're a young club, we're a club with depth. And that's something we talk about a lot, is how do we make sure that the stuff we do is meaningful and purpose driven so that it has depth, right?
Yeah. Was it seen as a risk? I mean, maybe I'm thinking very UK centric here, and I know this happens more in the US than it does in the UK, but uprooting a club and moving to a new place would be seen as a risk. Was the club pretty confident that there was a captive audience there? I suppose the fact that, as you say, Austin Anthem had already been around for 5 years, presumably canvassing pretty hard for this to happen, must have been reassuring. But was there a big study? And to what extent was it about, do we think there's a soccer audience waiting for us in Austin versus what's the sporting landscape in Austin itself? Because it's peculiar, right? I think I'm correct in saying that Austin was the US's largest city that didn't have a professional sports organization until you guys came into town.
Yeah. Fair question. And I think important point is, there wasn't a club that was moved to Austin. The ownership group came in and ultimately started Austin FC, right? But as it relates to the opportunity in this city, and you guys should speak to this because you've been part of Austin even longer than I. But yeah, absolutely, there is an opportunity for a professional sports team in Austin. But I always go back to the fact that it's not really about sport. I mean, if you want to talk about size and breadth and impact in Austin, well, UT football and UT basketball and a lot of metrics is on the same tier as professional sports. I mean, UT on a Saturday in the fall, they're putting, 90,000 people under their stadium. Yeah. It's a big freaking sports event.
These are the Longhorns, right?
Yes, the Longhorns, the UT Longhorns. So that's big time, and if you're thinking about share of voice and all of that sort of stuff, before Austin FC, they were taking up a lot of air in the city. But ultimately, I think what the biggest opportunity was, and what we tried to frame, was not how do we become, the best sports team in Austin, but really more going back to that community and that culture aspect. How do we be the best representation of Austin? And that created a different prism than, hey, let's just go, win a bunch of games and lift trophies and all that sort of stuff, which clearly the club wants to do. I mean, guys like Driussi are proof of that there's the ambition, but there's a larger opportunity to be a community sort of flashpoint and connective device for the city. And I don't know if you guys agree or disagree, but
yeah. No, I think I don't even think it was a risk, right? I think we knew as like locals, just based off we have like one of the highest viewerships of like World Cup when you think about that as well. Like even going to like Premier Leagues, like wanting to host like their shows here whenever, Liverpool and them like that were playing like in the finals. And so like having those like moments before us, and so we knew like we were hungry for it. Like we followed teams in Mexico and Central America, right? And so like we were thriving for have something to call our own. And so like when it came, we were like, finally, and we now are passionate about it and like going full throttle.
Yeah,
I agree. Austin is full of so many transplants that didn't go to UT or don't have a belonging to anything UT related, and just having something from a fresh start and being able to be a part of it and just enjoy this wild ride. I think it gives you something to grab onto and just want to be a part of.
yeah.
So this is a very small sample size, but Rico and Christina, I'm interested to know, nowadays the weekend comes round and, you're going to the stadium and you're watching Austin FC. What were you doing 5 years ago? Were you going to see the Longhorns, or were you, watching soccer on TV?
Yeah, no, definitely watching soccer on TV. I've never I always watched Longhorns, but I never went to the games. I didn't identify with UT. I didn't go there. I went to a different school. But yeah, I was always watching it on TV, Premier League, MLS, things like that. So when I was happy to have one here that I can actually see live.
I haven't been in Austin for about 6-7 years now, I think, maybe a little less. But before, it was just watching any type of sports on TV. Huge women's soccer fan, so I'd be watching that. But I think it's when Austin, was announced, that's when I became a huge MLS fan. Before then, it was just a casual watcher of the game.
And James, would the data bear that out? I mean, do you have any information on whether the Austin FC, season ticket holders or match-going fans are also Longhorns fans? Is there overlap, or are they actually two sort of fairly distinct audiences?
I think they're very distinct audiences. I don't have, a bunch of data to throw at you, but anecdotally, I can tell you, I think there's a huge audience of people that, to Rico's point, didn't identify with UT. I always tell this story. I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska, which is the home of the Huskers. And I'm sure your listener base doesn't know about college football history, but I grew up with the Longhorns kicking my team's ass pretty consistently. And so I wasn't, in moving to Austin, going to be pretty open to being a Longhorns fan. But I think that's an experience that a lot of people identify with, because, I think actually college football and football in the States, like global football, it's very similar because it's so tribal. It's so community oriented. It's so clan oriented that it's hard for that crossover to happen. And you need to go to the school, or you need to grow up with it, or anything like that. So I think there's a big distinction. And it's funny, I go to UT games every once in a while, and I see a totally different part of Austin. And in some ways, I don't see Austin. I see Texas. And for anybody that knows Austin versus Texas, Austin is a very unique place within the state of Texas, right? Mm-hmm. So to go to your question, yeah, I don't think there's a lot of overlap. There's some that definitely exists, right? But we're really, at the end of the day, talking about two pretty significantly different fan bases.
I was just going to say, I think it took about a third way through the first season for us to actually have a game on the same time that the Longhorns were playing.
Yeah.
And I know at the supporter level, we were just thinking, because we have a lot of people that do both. And when it filled up real quickly, I don't think anyone was worried about it anymore.
Yeah. There you go. I'm interested about that Austin versus Texas point of view. And the context that I'm particularly interested in is the visual identity of the club. I'm going to give you two very basic observations that I have about Austin FC. Okay, you ready? Number one, the shirt is green, and that's not a common color with football clubs, I think, anywhere around the world, really. So that kind of, sets it apart. And then number two, this is slightly more perceptive. I associate Texan sporting organizations with two things: horns and stars. And when I say stars, I really mean one star, right? Lone Star State. Austin FC doesn't have any horns on the logo or anywhere that I can see, and it doesn't have any stars either. Was that a conscious decision when creating the visual identity?
100%. And it wasn't really necessarily about being anti-Texas. It was more about just focusing on Austin, right? But you hit the nail on the head of a really important thing that was at the genesis for us when we were starting the club. Like, this is about Austin. We're not trying to be Texas's team. We can leave that to somebody else. Frankly, we don't care. We want to be Austin's team. And, I remember getting a lot of, whether it's like, merch companies that want to create our merch, or, you know, companies that pitch us on different things, whatever. And they'd always put a, outline of the Texas state next to our crest. We said, no, like that's not what this is about at all. And in a lot of ways, like Austin is in some ways, the anti-Texas is probably unfair to say, but there's a saying here that Austin is the blueberry and the tomato soup of Texas, and it's very true. And I think it's something that Austinites are really prideful of, right? If you ask an Austinite, where are you from, they're going to tell you Austin before they tell you Texas. And it's a huge distinction, and it's something that we were really conscientious of focusing on. We were ultimately building the brand for the club. And I think on the supporter side, you guys probably felt the same way. Now, we're more than happy to beat those other Texas teams and raise the Copa Tejas trophy, which is the trophy that all the Texas teams compete for, which we won last year. But again, we're focused on Austin and being the best community for this city. And it's almost like we more happen to be in Texas, right?
Yeah.
Rico, Christine, would you agree with that? And to what extent, maybe you never thought about it before because, you just pull the shirt on, but to what extent does that resonate, what James is talking about?
Yeah, no, I agree. I grew up, in San Antonio, like idolizing the Spurs and things like that. So like to me, like that is near to me than like the Longhorns or like the actual like logo of Texas. And so like us being like more Austin, Texas, I think resonates in like so many levels, from like how we uplift each other to the things we stand behind that's like impacting our community in like so many ways that some teams don't think about, or like they're just not like near and dear to them. So I think us just like having something that, like James says, like let us like identify as like, no, this is us, and this is like truly only us, and like fuck everybody else, respectfully, but this is us and this is who we are.
I've lived in Houston. I've lived in Dallas, thankfully short-lived. But Austin is just so Austin, and I could never imagine living here. It's just such a unique community.
So there's a real sense of individuality, of uniqueness, of wanting to stand out. But Austin FC is still part of this overall movement that is the MLS, right? A young league, a growing league. You see audience figures every year being broken, whether it's in stadium or on TV. How rosy do you think the picture is? James, I guess to you first up.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sky is the limit for this league. It's an exciting thing to be part of MLS in this sort of portion of its life cycle. And from I'm brand and marketing lead, so I think about that stuff pretty consistently. And I don't think the league's ever been stronger than it is at this point in those ways. And in a lot of ways, I think the Apple broadcast partnership that's been started is going to be a sea change moment for the league. We're already seeing that because in a lot of ways, I think Apple is the one that truly understands what MLS brings to the table, which is this sort of community aspect, this sort of different thing that is, unique to other sports in the States in a major way. And I think they're also going to bring the production value and, the sort of packaging that the league deserves, which it hadn't really gotten before because it was, trying to compete in the same bracket as NFL and MLB and NHL. And we've got a partner in Apple that understands that MLS is a different animal altogether. So I think that's hugely, hugely helpful. Obviously, we've got, the World Cup on the horizon. And I don't think that's going to be necessarily a moonshot for the sport here, because I think the sport's growing irrespective of that. And that's what makes being part of sort of global football within the States so interesting, is because there is this sort of constant sort of chugging forward that you're seeing. And it's happening with a lot of these new marketplaces where they're getting to be able to grow and launch brands built for this day and age. And, just like in England, just like in the UK, football brands are typically legacy brands, and that can be a benefit. It can also be a curse, right? Because they can get locked in. to a certain way of doing things. Here in the States, with new clubs that are starting, that are maybe a year old or 2 years old or 3 years old, they can create a brand and a community that's very much oriented around now. And I think that's what you've seen with Austin FC. So I'm extremely bullish on the future of the sport in this country. And in a lot of ways, the threshold that we need to cross now is stop talking about when is the growth going to come, what does the future look like, and start to celebrate the culture that exists today. I think anybody that walks into Q2 Stadium and experiences an Austin FC match with people like Rico and Christine in the stands, it holds a candle to any experience you're gonna see in the world. Germany, the UK, Brazil, Argentina. And the coolest thing is we have our own flavor of football. We have a flavor in Austin that is unique. And at the end of the day, that's what makes football exciting, because Bundesliga is different than the Premier League, La Liga is different than Bundesliga, and MLS is different than La Liga and all the rest of them. And we get to provide our own sort of spin. And as long as it's authentic and true to the communities that we're trying to represent, I think you create something that everybody has to look around and respect and say, okay, hat tip to them, because they're doing things their own way and it's resonating. Because you can never argue with a full stadium of people that are going crazy for their team. You've got to respect that at its base, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think even like on the supporter side, like speaking for Los Verdes, I think what we try to do is like think of ways of like how to improve like the supporter culture, or how to think things differently. Like, what is our impact? How do we want to like push the envelope of what we're doing? We already have like other professional teams that reach out to us on the supporter side. Like, what the hell are y'all doing? Like, how can we put that in our stands with our fans to get them as wild? Or even thinking of ways of how we like travel as fans. Like, we're not allowed instruments. Okay, we're going to bring kazoos, or we're going to bring bam bam sticks, right? We're going to push the envelope of ways. I'm like, okay, we're going to find a way around it to show you like, damn, they don't F around, but we're also going to do it respectfully. We're going to pick up our trash when we go to your stadiums. Yep. We're going to thank you for having us, like, things like that. And so we're again continuing to be inclusive, but also showing that like we're not going to mess around, and we're going to push the envelope. And to what James said, we're going to bring our own little spice to it.
So when they ask you that question, what's the how do you create this atmosphere? What's the answer to that? Because it's amazing if it's true that in 4 years you're creating an atmosphere that holds a candle, James, as you said, to these teams who have been playing for 100, 150 years. That's an incredible achievement. Does it happen organically? Was it just right place, right time? Or is there a lot of hard work going on in the background between club and fan base to ensure that there is this special atmosphere?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of both, like the organic piece, like definitely for sure, but like hard work, right? We're still trying to push the envelope. We're still trying to think of new ways to bring new ideas and different things that we can do, not only within the stadium and on the pitch, but like off the pitch, right? And in order for us to continue to like show the growth or the voice of Austin FC, and then our supporter culture, from Austin Anthem to Los Verdes to La Murga to Fighting Leslie to anyone that's supporting the club. We're all trying to think of ways to continue to improve and to do something different.
How closely do you work with the club? A question to you, Rico, but then also to Christine. Like, is it daily, weekly, annual dialogue that you're having?
Yeah, no, we talk to these guys often. Like me and James, we have each other's numbers. Like if something happens, like we text each other. If something we're upset with that we don't align with the club, he knows he'll get a text from us or something like that. So I think it's that great partnership of just like, yo, we're okay. Like, yes, like they run a business, but they know like, oh, like Los Verdes and Anthem, they'll come for us, or not anything like that. But like we have a great dialogue, I think, especially when if we don't align, we're going to talk about it. When we do align, we're going to talk about it. And I think that's the great thing about like the partnership that we have together.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we're kind of on the same page about a lot of stuff. They could obviously, think differently, but I think just making sure, when we come together and we're all aligned, I think that's what's going to give the best game day experience.
Yeah, I think from day one, from the club side, we try to recognize, that in a lot of ways, what people like Rico and Christine can bring to the table via the supporter groups are what's going to be what distinguishes us, not only in MLS, but in the sort of global football realm, right? And so I think we were hell-bent on making sure that supporters were part of the process. And I say this a lot, like, I think in a lot of ways, like our supporters groups are helpful in being a sort of conscience outside of the club, right? Rico would tell me, Christine too, like when we mess something up, and we're not perfect, right? Like we've messed up in the past, and they've let us know, like sometimes pretty fervently. And that's all right. And it's good. There should be a back and forth, right? Like, listen, at the end of the day, the club exists to create community for fans.
Yeah.
And if we're not going to create a culture where we don't listen to our most hardcore fans, what are we doing? Like, what kind of, I mean, not that we really think of ourselves as a traditional business, but like, what kind of community entity doesn't listen to its constituency? I mean, a lot of ones don't, and that's why they're bad. But, like we try and create a situation where there's constant dialogue. And that also doesn't mean always agreeing. I mean, there's been points in the past where we just say, listen, like, we're not able to come together on this one, but it doesn't put us in a position where the entire relationship is sour, because we know there's respect there, right? And that each entity values the other side. And we all know that we're just kind of trying to do our best. We're ultimately, all of us around the table, we're trying to create something that's unique for Austin, that celebrates this community, that gives everybody on a Saturday, from February, hopefully through to November, an opportunity to hang out with 20,000, 21,000 other people that feel the same way and want to get together for 90 minutes and root for their team and root for Austin. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's the goal. So if every decision we're making is viewed through that lens, we can do a lot together.
You must also be very conscious, James, that a club, and this isn't unique to Austin or the MLS, this I think is universal in the world of football, a club is often viewed through the lens of their fans, or rather, fans represent that club. And so while it may be that, that shirt is particularly green and Driussi is a particularly good player, and hopefully we're playing in the playoffs in November, it may also be that actually in the outside world, when the first glimpse they get and their strongest perception of who Austin FC is via the fans.
100%. And I go back to the fact of, listen, we're going to differentiate ourselves on the pitch, obviously, by trying to win games and bringing in dynamic players, but that's one portion of the equation. The other portion of the equation is the community and the culture that exists in the fans. And from day one on the Austin FC side, we're very conscientious to make sure that fans were part of what we broadcast to the world, right? If you look at our social channels, if you look at the broadcasts we had, we spent a lot of time making sure that fans, and particularly supporters, were at the front of that. One, because we want to champion the stuff that they're doing and help everybody understand that they're a valued piece of the pie, just as valued as what's happening on the pitch. Mm-hmm. But also, like, that's how we differentiate ourselves. That's one of the most extraordinary things about MLS culture, is when you go into these really strong markets, the fan culture is unlike any other. It's unique, it's diverse, it's authentic. And I think a lot of ways, we get to have conversations with the likes of y'all because of this fan culture, right? So it's clearly proving out in terms of moving the needle and getting people to think about global football in the States in a different way. Because again, you cannot deny fandom. When you have a full stadium and everyone's on the same page and going nuts for their team, at the end of the day, that's what football is all about, mm-hmm. right? And that's just can't be debated.
It's a message I've heard a few times, and it's self-evident if you look at the fans in the stadia. So, I do doff my cap to the MLS as a whole and to Austin FC, because I think it's an amazing achievement in a short period of time. Now, we're talking about why Austin FC is known and what it's known by. And I can't believe we've done, nearly half an hour and we haven't yet mentioned or barely mentioned Matthew McConaughey. And I want to talk about him because he is also, I guess, within the US, but certainly this side of the pond, probably the first thing that comes to mind when someone says the name Austin FC is the co-owner and Minister of Culture. How does having such a charismatic guy work? What's his role?
Well, I mean, he's been hugely impactful in the culture of this club. And, the first thing I always say to people is the value that Matthew brought to this team. It's actually felt a lot more behind the camera than it is in front. And I think immediately because Matthew's a global star and everybody knows him, I think there's maybe a little bit of cynicism to jump in and say, okay, it's kind of like a dog and pony show. And, he's coming out here and banging some bongos at the opening match. And that's really it. And I will tell you that nothing could be further from the truth. He takes this minister of culture role very seriously. And he's been so in tune with the type of community and culture that we create as a club, and making sure that, it's representative of Austin, because from day one, he was on the same page as the idea of, listen, football is the vehicle to a larger goal, which is ultimately, and we've said it a couple times, that opportunity to get everybody in an environment feeling and thinking the same way and rooting for the same entity. And again, that's something that's universal within sport, but that's what he was really focused on. And I can't underline enough, there's never been a meeting or a phone call or an opportunity that he didn't take to support Austin FC. And it's been hugely impactful. I mean, you guys have all, hung out with them, spoke with them, and I think you guys see that passion he feels for Austin FC is authentic. It's not something where he's trying to sort of maximize his own personal brand or anything like that. It's really authentic. And I think the proof is in the pudding in terms of the culture that's been created around the club, because in a lot of ways he is a sort of like cultural laureate of Austin, and he's imbued that perspective in the club.
Yeah, I agree 100% what you said, for sure.
Yeah, from impromptu Zoom meetings to showing up to practice, La Marga practice. He's been, a valuable asset to the club.
He's focused and he's cued in. And I think for all of us, like on learnings that we can take from Matthew, it's the idea that when he's involved in a meeting, when he's involved in a session, 100% there and 100% focused on this sort of long-term goal of being a flag bearer for Austin.
So his commitment is clear. How about using him, or how about the perception that Austin FC is Matthew McConaughey's club? I mean, is there a danger, despite all his best intentions and the hard work he does behind the scenes, that sort of everything you guys are doing, whether it's from the club's point of view or the supporters' point of view, you're Matthew McConaughey's team?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. It's a consideration, and nobody is more cognizant of that than Matthew himself. From day one, he was really conscientious about, he does not want to become the de facto mascot of the club. Right. And it's proved out in the fact that, we really only show Matthew on our channels really every once in a while. And it's a small fraction of the time that he's spending talking about, jersey designs or, brand directions, or hanging out with the guys during training. Right. There's a lot of times where he's popping in. We put the cameras away. We put the media team away, because we want to make sure that we're first and foremost focused on his position as an owner and sort of like a cultural stakeholder in the club. But it's a fair point. It's a two-sided thing in terms of how Matthew gets involved from a front-facing perspective and a visual perspective, because he's very focused on the club being an asset for Austin and not an asset for Matthew McConaughey, right?
I want to look forward just at the end of this podcast, and I want to think about the ambitions for the club, because you guys have clearly done an amazing job at capturing the attention and the love of the city of Austin, and I think there's a lot of admiration within the US for that. How far can the club go? And the reason I ask this question is I heard that there's this ambition for Austin FC to be everyone's second favorite team, whether that's in the US or whether that's even abroad, perhaps over in Europe. That's a lofty goal. Is that a publicly stated goal, and do you think it's achievable?
Well, I think let's unpack that, right? I think there's an opportunity for this club to be representative of what makes Austin special. And I think there's a lot of people that come through Austin and pick up on the fact that this city's different, right? Whether you're coming here for South by or you go to ACL, spending 48 hours in this town, it's hard to walk away and not one scheme about how you'll eventually move to Austin, but at a minimum say, damn, that was a really cool city and a city that I identify with. And if Austin FC can be part of what people take home with them, whether they're going back to Copenhagen or London or Seattle, I think that's a huge opportunity in the world of global football today. A lot of people have multiple teams. Maybe you're an Arsenal fan on Saturday afternoons.
Oof. I'm sorry.
Sorry, we get it. Manchester United fan sitting next to me, which is a great encapsulation, right? Like you can be a fan of multiple clubs and you can have different relationships with different clubs. This idea that everybody is solely sworn to one team or another. I think that's really ultimately in practicality, not very true. It's a romantic way to think of global football, but it's not in practice a way that a lot of people engage in the sport. And, again, with like the Apple broadcast deal and the opportunity for MLS to be truly global in a unique way, I think there's a great chance for us to start to cultivate fandom outside of Austin. We're always going to be focused on Austin. That is the key. But in a lot of ways, I think that's an opportunity for us to create authentic fans outside of this city, because there's a lot of people that come through here and are enamored with Austin. Mm-hmm. And what better way to be able to connect with this city when you're not here than turning Austin FC on and watching these guys play and ultimately watching the culture that's in the stands. But I'm curious for you guys' perspective on this.
Yeah, I think for us, like on the Los Verdes side, it's like we already seeing the reach go outside of Austin, where we have fans. Yeah. Like we have watch parties in Waco. We have shout out to Carlos in Arkansas. Shout out to our people in DC. We have to try to ship jerseys to Ireland. Like we're trying to think of ways to like get these fans, that people that are like excited about us, that are behind this club and behind this team. And continue to keep them engaged and inspired and wanting to like be ready to come out and have a match with us. Or when we go to their city, they're excited to host us. We're getting nods from people. We just went to Houston recently, and Houston fans were like, I'm from Argentina. What y'all bring is amazing. What y'all do is amazing. And just like tipped their hat to us. And that's when we knew we're doing something right. And so like we're already someone's first team, not their second team in my eyes.
Yeah.
I'm going to echo Rico's sentiment. He basically hit the nail on the head. There's so many people within both groups, or all the supporters groups, that basically travel from somewhere else. We've got a dad with two twin kids that come down all the way from Dallas. They try to make every game, and it's amazing because you have a team 20 minutes away that you refuse to go watch because like you fell in love with Austin with one trip here. And it just constantly creating this atmosphere where everyone just wants to come back.
See, you see the rivalry coming through, Alex. The guys can't go through a 20-minute conversation without making a dig at Houston and Dallas. So
I was going to bring the trophy, but
yeah, exactly. Fair enough.
All those horns and stars.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think it's amazing the progress the club has made in the last 4 years. I'm very excited to see what the next 4 and beyond bring. But James, Rico, Christine, we'd better leave it there. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Alex. Can't wait to host you down here in Austin sometime soon.
You got to be careful. I take people up on those offers. So, I'll be in town.
All right. Love it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all. And thank you, listener, for tuning in. Until next time, all the best.